What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and, well, with Pokémon Winds and Waves being announced for release next year in 2027, we are officially in speculation season for Generation 10. And honestly, I'm all here for it, which is really saying a lot since, honestly, I've been thinking about a lot of different Pokemon that could basically be seen in a southeastern a southern or southeastern Asian based Pokemon region. And it's especially interesting as I've been, creating Pokemon for my own Fakemon region, Antaria, which basically is based on the southern United States. But that being said, it got me wondering, what would happen if we had other Pokemon? What sort of Pokemon or what sort of animal out there would make for an amazing Pokemon idea? And that's what led me to this sort of countdown. Where I basically took a look at every animal that could be made into a Pokemon. So, again, that's what I'm planning to do. That's what this is all about. That being said, if we do get an announcement for specific Pokemon for Winds and Waves, and they're based on any of these Pokemon, again, just know I didn't predict them. These are just speculations. And with that being said, it's time to take a look at the top 10 animals that could be Pokemon. That should be Pokemon. And in certain aspects, could be Pokemon. So, let's get started. Starting off first at number 10, we have Carnotaurus. Oh boy, and starting off with the first entry is a dinosaur. Now, in certain aspects, this really shouldn't surprise anyone, as we've had fossil Pokemon all the way back in Generation 1. And ever since then, we have had a traditional fossil Pokemon, pair of fossil Pokemon, except for Shoto and Alola, where they have at least been part rock. And heck, it took us until Generation 4 to get fossil Pokemon that are based on dinosaurs. So it Generation 8 did kind of overturn that trend by giving us by giving us mix and match style creatures that are made by fusing two fossils together as a sort of reference to England and the Bone Wars. And while Paldea kind of eschewed the idea of fossil Pokemon for Paradox Pokemon, specifically the past Paradox Pokemon, which are based on prehistoric creatures, yeah, it kind of makes sense that that we are overdue for a traditional fossil Pokemon. And honestly, one of the Pokemon that could make the most sense is a Pokemon based on a Carnotaurus, which again, it made me think of Dinosaur King, since I never learned about what a Carnotaurus is until I saw the anime Dinosaur King. And how its name means meatball. So, seeing a Carnotaurus Pokemon would be kind of an interesting fossil Pokemon to show up. Maybe pure rock rock ground, rock fighting, or even rock dragon type to contend with the likes of Tyrant and Tyrantrum. I mean, heck, maybe even rock flying to sort of reference how Ace in Dinosaur King had the ability had access to wind-based attacks. And since flying type is the closest to the wind type, it sort of makes sense there and adds as a nice little nod to Dinosaur King. Again, wouldn't be the first time that Pokemon had a positive, well, I guess I'd say a nod to something that's similar to it. As again, considering how Yokai Watch failed to somewhat pass up Pokemon to a lesser extent, and the whole Power World thing, yeah, we're due for something like this. Moving on next at number 9, we have Canary. Alright. Speaking of Pokemon that would make for an interesting of animals that would make for an interesting Pokemon, an idea. A lot of people would not expect that a canary would be would expect a canary. Since naturally when most people would think of canaries, they would think of just simple songbirds. And honestly, that much is true since when you think of canaries, most people would think of Pokemon of a bird that is known to sing fairly sweetly. Or they think of Tweety Bird and how he's more or less is able to outsmart Sylvester in Looney Tunes. But that being said, honestly, canaries are kind of more than meets the eye. Especially when I created a fairy-type canary Pokemon of my own. That basically is based on the idea of the phrase canary in the coal mine. How back when mining was the main profession, specifically either coal mining, gold mining, what have you, many people would bring canaries in bird cages down into the mines with them. And if a canary stopped singing and dropped dead, it basically meant that there were poisonous gases in the area, and they had to evacuate post haste. So basically, having a Pokemon with the ability, giving it the ability immunity or natural cure would be an interesting idea for a canary Pokemon, as it references this part in history. Or maybe even making it fairy poison for that sort of reason. As the only poison fairy type Pokemon we've had is Galarian Weezing. Granted, it could have also made sense for a Galar. It could have also made sense for Galar, but trust me, there is another Pokemon that proves that Galar that could have proven perfect for Galar later on down the line. So, yeah. Really says a lot. Moving on next at number 8, we have the Texas Longhorn. Alright. And now for anyone who lives in Texas, then I know they've seen a lot of Texas Longhorn cattle out there. Especially in certain areas like Laredo or even a place like San Antonio or Lubbock, where ranching and cattle drives are more or less prevalent to an extent. Again, I don't know. I have never been in Texas. I've never been down in Texas, so if anyone's from Texas, are cattle drives common in your neck of the woods? Because I don't exactly know. But that being said, we have had a fair amount of bovine or cattle Pokemon in the past few years, with the likes of Tauros and Miltank showing up as counterparts of each other, and Buffalon being the first ever bison Pokemon. I mean, heck, with the recent generation, we got regional variants of Tauros in Paldea that had 3 specific forms, all based on fighting bulls. But that being said, so it kind of seems like it would be somewhat unlikely for a Texas Longhorn Pokemon to be a reality. But in all fairness, there are a lot we could go with for a Texas Longhorn Pokemon. Especially with the fact that it could be a pure fighting type. That being said, it could also be especially noticeable is that it could basically be a Pokemon that could evolve. Perhaps maybe becoming bulkier and also much more bipedal. Either to reference one of two things. Either a football player or for most people that aren't from the United States, an American football player, as a reference to the University of Texas college football team. Go Longhorns. Seriously, go Longhorns. I don't even know anymore. Or maybe even based on the Greek mythological figure of the Minotaur, being a half-human, half-bull creature who is known for patrolling the labyrinth and eating anyone that wandered into its domain. Yeah. The fact it could go one of two ways really proves how awesome an idea could be, like the Texas Longhorn Pokemon could be. So, yeah. Says a lot. Moving on next at number 7, we have a Spoonbill. Alright. Here's a little truth time. Before, when I originally made this list, I originally considered putting in the idea of a Shoebill Pokemon. Since, honestly, a Shoebill Pokemon would be kind of an awesome Pokemon, as the fact that they're almost noticeable beaks, their massive size, and their more menacing visages could make for an amazing Pokemon that's like either dark flying or ghost flying. However, considering how the grass types, how we already got a grass type bird Pokemon in Brout, which might end up evolving into like a cassowary, moa, shoebill-esque Pokemon in its final evolutions. Yeah, there's a good chance that that's already covered. So, there's a good chance that's already covered. So I had to go with the next best Pokemon, the Spoonbill. And honestly, I think a lot of people sleep on the Spoonbill Pokemon, especially the Roseate Spoonbill, which, considering how it's known for its paddle-like bill, and the fact it's known for, it could be seen as an interesting idea for a wading bird, like either water flying or water fairy type, due to its more light pinkish coloration. Of course, there's a good chance we could also see it getting a different type rather than just water type, like we saw with Flamigo in the Paldea region. But it all depends on whether we get it. But either way, it looks to be a pretty awesome Pokemon idea. Maybe making it fairy flying or just pure fairy. Again, don't know how to preface this, but it's an interesting one to say the least. Moving on next at number 6, we have a Bulldog. Yeah. Remember when I mentioned how Galar could have essentially had a canary Pokemon? Yeah, it's very fair to say that a Bulldog would have been equally as amazing to see in Galar than a canary. And in all fairness, the first thing I have to say is that this more or less popped into my head after seeing a video from Mr. Buddy, after seeing Mr. Buddy's video about what if England was a Pokemon region. And honestly, I'm surprised that a lot of Pokemon that were introduced in that video were not seen in Galar. And one of the Pokemon that he had was a Fire-type starter line based on Bulldogs. Now, that evolved into a Fire-Steel type. Now, in all fairness, I know we already have the Snubbull line, which are Bulldogs in themselves, specifically based on the Kusi, or the Kushi, of Irish or British folklore. And of course, I have no hate on the Scorbunny line, which the fact that they add in soccer as an aspect of its design is kind of top notch. But that being said, seeing a Bulldog Pokemon would have been amazing in some way, shape, or form. Again, either as a fire type, possibly a fire type starter, a fighting type, or even a steel type. Yeah. And it would have been, and if not as a regional as a fire type starter, it could have essentially made for an amazing amazing regional dog Pokemon. And again, no hate on the Yamper line, as again, it's a corgi. When you think of Britain or England, you think of corgis because they're linked with the British monarchy or the British royals. In fact, the late Queen Elizabeth II was known for having having a pet corgi. At least I think. But yeah. Even further, Pokemon Journeys would have been awesome to see a bulldog Pokemon as a pet, as an extra family pet for Chloe and her family alongside Yamper. And again, Yamper in Pokemon Journeys is adorable. I mean, not only would Yamper be kind of similar to Scooby-Doo in most of its appearances, but the Bulldog Pokemon would also be similar to, like, I'd say Frank from the Men in Black movies and the animated series, or Jake from Adventure Time. Again, it's also unlikely because there's one type that also could be fitting for it, being the Dark type. But, I doubt Game Freak would want to have anything to do with the sordid practice of bull baiting. That's not a good thing. Or a good look. Moving on next at number 5, we have the Aardvark. Yeah. When it comes down to it, I initially put the Aardvark on this list because I thought it would be an interesting Pokemon to see. However, as of recently, I just realized, hey, you know what? It would be nice to see it have like somewhat of a rivalry with Heatmore. Since Heatmore are based on anteaters, it would be nice to have an Aardvark Pokemon kind of also be seen as a sort of a additional predator to Durant and compete with Heatmore over Durant colonies, which really kind of makes some sense. And we all know Durant basically became Bug Steel to more or less protect themselves from Heatmore, only making it 4 times weak to fire. But maybe makes me wonder, what if it became Bug Steel to protect itself from an Aardvark Pokemon? And hey, we've never had a Legends game which introduced a wholly new Pokemon. So what if we had a Legends Unova game that introduced an Aardvark Pokemon that was like either pure ground or ground steel, who is known for basically being much more of a prevalent and hunter of Durant, and being able to rip into them and just eat their meaty insides. And as such, Durant more or less adapted, becoming Bug Steel and protecting itself from the Aardvark Pokemon's almost pickaxe-like claws, only to more or less swing the food chain pendulum the other way, and making them much more easier for Heatmore to get at them. Just burn through their steel-like carapace, thus more or less pushing the Aardvark Pokemon out of the Unova region, or more or less causing them to become, I guess I'd say, extinct in modern day. In modern day Unova and everywhere else. Yeah, it would be a little bit morbid, but again, that's what competition will do. That's what competition in the food chain will do. You gotta find a way to adapt. Moving on next at number 4, we have Goose. We have a Goose. Yeah. It has been 9, almost 10 generations, 30 years since Pokemon got started, and we have yet to have a Goose Pokemon. At this point, we have had every sort of poultry-esque Pokemon showing up in some way, shape, or form. We've had all sorts of poultry or waterfowl-esque Pokemon showing up in some way, shape, or form in the franchise. As we've had several regions with ducks in them, a region with a chicken as a starter, a fire-type starter line that's basically based on chickens. We have a swan Pokemon, a pheasant Pokemon, and of course, with Paldea, we have a duck Pokemon that evolves into a peafowl. So, at this point, why no Goose? Granted, we also don't have any turkey Pokemon, but that's neither here nor there. In this case, a Goose Pokemon is obviously a shoo-in, since for anyone who knows, for anyone who has been around a goose, they know these things are nasty. And by nasty, I mean they can be hostile to downright territorial. Granted, it's mostly protecting their young, but in all fairness, if they are messed with, they will come back at ya, hissing all the while. And again, I knew someone from when I was in high school who messed with a couple of geese out of the parking lot near the school that I went to. And they came back at him just hissing at him. Just full on scaring him. So in all fairness, a Goose Pokemon would be an interesting Pokemon nonetheless. That being said, it's a goose. Either way, it would be an awesome thing to see. And even further, a goose Pokemon is, in this case, it could be an interesting Pokemon either being pure dark or dark flying. Or, arguably enough, dark poison. Since for anyone who lives in an area that's known for having high concentrations of geese, whether normal geese or Canadian geese, yeah, they know they've had to deal with a minefield of goose doo-doo. Yeah. Seriously. Where there's geese, there's doo-doo. That's all I'm gonna say. Alright. Moving on next at number 3, we have a fire ant. Oh boy. Yeah. This one is actually something I more or less made a regional variant of. As for my own Fakemon region of Antaria, I created a regional variant of Durant that's based on a fire ant. And honestly, in all fairness, it basically looks pretty good as it became fire bug or bug fire in order to protect itself from heat more. And basically in this case, however, that being said, and even with that, kind of makes me wonder what it would be like if we got a standalone fire ant Pokemon that is not based on a that is not basically a regional variant of that's not just a regional variant of Durant. In this case, it could be a simple idea for a fire ant Pokemon. Not only that, that is like bug fire, like since it's a literal fire ant. Additionally, it could essentially have access to like poison type moves or maybe an ability like Poison Point or Poison Touch specifically. That's more or less, or even an ability like Immunity to somewhat reference how fire ants, how some people can have allergies to fire ant stings. It can be allergic to fire ant stings. Or, heck, maybe even be based on a bullet ant. Based on a bullet ant from South America, which many indigenous people from South America have used bullet ants as a sort of test of courage. And again, I don't mean to utilize Digimon here, but honestly, the whole fact that courage is linked with fire is really not lost on me. Really says a lot. And yes, when it comes down to most insects, we have had so many Pokemon based on them, based on different insects, that several Pokemon that we've had, that most people have made Fakemon based on, and so many animals people have made Fakemon based on, have had actual Pokemon that kind of differentiate from what we normally expect them to be. So, if we do get a fire ant, maybe it might not be bug fire, but could be fire poison. I mean, heck, Buzzwole and Pheromosa basically are Buzzwole, Pheromosa, and Lokix basically bucked the trends for what we expected. Well, a mosquito Pokemon, a cockroach Pokemon, or a grasshopper / locust Pokemon would essentially look like. So, why not this? Moving on next at number 2, we have a Quokka Pokemon. Yeah, honestly, this could be an obvious speculation for a Pokemon for Pokemon Winds and Waves. But in all fairness, as much as I've heard a lot of predictions for this and for the Pokedex or new Pokemon in this region, I've heard so many people say that we get Pokemon based on an animal from Australia. And honestly, I'd be here for a Australian-based Pokemon, which really does. I'd be here for a Pokemon that's based on an animal from Australia to be in Winds and Waves. I mean, heck, in all fairness, like many other people, the first thing that came to my mind was a proper kangaroo Pokemon aside from Kangaskhan. And there are others like Pokemon based on dingoes or based on a dingo or a Tasmanian devil. However, one Pokemon that came to mind is the Quokka. And honestly, have you seen a picture of one of these little guys? They are just adorable. They are just, seriously, there's a reason why there is a trend of people going to Australia and taking selfies with Quokkas. Because they are just so photogenic and they are willing to, and they make perfect buddies for photos. As for any sort of photo op. Especially with their smiling faces. So, honestly, might make sense for a Quokka Pokemon to be a more or less cutesy, happy-go-lucky fairy type. Or at least keeping up with the more burrowing mammal or burrowing marsupial sort of thing. It could be a ground type, a fairy grass type, or even an electric fairy type Pika clone. Granted, I know we have Dedenne, but an electric. But in all fairness, if there is a Quokka as a Pika clone, honestly, electric fairy fits. Of course, there also is the another Fakemon called Quokenki. I forgot who created it. I think it was Dark and Windy. But in all fairness, there are so many that could come from a Quokka Pokemon that I would honestly be here for. And I wouldn't be surprised if Pokemon Winds and Waves did make this a reality. That's really fair to say. Alright, before we move on to the number 1 entry, let's do some honorable mentions. First honorable mention is a horned toad. Yeah. Again, when it comes down to it, a southern United States Pokemon region like Ontario. This could be perfect for a southern United States Pokemon region like the Ontario region. Or even a region based on Texas. Since when it comes down to it, they're known for being found in desert-based regions. I mean, heck, it could even show up in Winds and Waves due to also being based on a thorny devil, which can be found in Australia. Which, again, a horned toad or thorny devil Pokemon would make for an interesting Pokemon. Maybe even combining the two. Then again, of course, there is the fact that the horned toad can shoot blood from their eyes, and it's highly unlikely that Game Freak would it's highly unlikely that Game Freak would basically lean into that. So I think they would avoid that. If they did make one, they would find a way to avoid the blood shooting thing. Honorable mention number 2 is a cardinal. And yeah, whenever there's a bird, if there's ever a Pokemon that could look like it could be if there's ever a bird that could look like it could be a Pokemon, it's a cardinal. I mean, this is one of the few Pokemon that is perfect, is a perfect idea for it. I mean, not only that, its vibrant red coloration screams fire type. So basically, and I should know, I once created a fire flying type cardinal Pokemon that evolved into a fire flying type hawk. Problem is, it more or less, it's hard to make a original cardinal Pokemon that doesn't eventually lean too far into Talonflame territory. So, yeah, this also fits with the less likely category, but in fairness, it does seem to be, it's an interesting idea nonetheless. A third Pokemon, honorable mention number 3, is a Pokemon based on a fly. Honestly, like I said with the goose Pokemon, I am shocked that we do not have a Pokemon based on a fly. Like any sort of fly, like a horsefly, a botfly, a Blandford fly, or even just a standard housefly. I'm surprised we do not have a fly Pokemon as of yet, as they can be found anywhere you could find an insect. In fact, they could have been found in like Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, Paldea. They're that prevalent. Problem is, there are so many types or type combinations it could be, it's very hard to nail down a specific type or type combination for it. Whether pure bug, bug flying, bug poison, bug dark, bug ground, bug ghost to reference ghost flies, or even bug steel to kind of reference a robotic fly and the phrase fly on the wall, like someone who's eavesdropping on a conversation, like a spy of sorts. So, honestly, keep in mind, yeah, if you hadn't guessed, most of these are just unlikely. Moving on, with honorable mention number 4, we have a Wolverine. We have the Wolverine. And honestly, this one is just for me. As in, The Wolverine is one of my favorite animals next to the elephant and the penguin. And in all fairness, I find these things to look pretty cool, as not only are these things pretty stocky, but they look vicious enough to rip into flesh, like fully rend it. And they look like they do not give two hoots about whoever comes near them. They will attack no matter what. Again, bonus points if we have a Wolverine Pokemon that is introduced in a Canadian region that's like fighting steel type with an ability like Natural Cure, as a sort of a nod to a certain Marvel superhero with an adamantine skeleton. And honorable mention number 5, we have the Virginia opossum. Yeah, honestly, in all fairness, the Virginia opossum is kind of an interesting thing, since when most people think about possums or opossums, one of the most prevalent when they think of the first thing that comes to mind is the Virginia opossum, as well as its ability to play dead in order to, well, more or less, whenever they're faced with any predators, there's thus making it so that any predator that's been pursuing it notices it, they take some time to they eventually will lose interest and head off somewhere else, thus allowing them to wake up and just go off on their merry way. And honestly, I've seen a fair amount of opossum Pokemon that are at least normal ghost, or they're at least ghost type or part ghost type. Again, case in point being of course Spokoi and Opaque Spiel from Loxton's Cascade region, and of course Mortsupial from my own Fakemon region, Antaria. So, but then again, keep in mind any Virginia opossum Pokemon at least makes sense as a ghost type or part ghost type. So, that's kind of simple. Finally, at number 1, we have the Siberian Husky. Yeah. If there ever is a dog Pokemon that honestly would make for a perfect Pokemon idea, if there's ever an animal that would make a perfect idea for a Pokemon, it's the Siberian Husky. And actually, there are a lot of dogs that are iconic and are pretty much well known by many dog owners, as we have as again, a lot of people know of dogs like Golden Retrievers, Bulldogs, Dalmatians, and Great Danes, Labrador Retrievers, and of course, we don't have to look as far as the likes of Johto and Kalos, which gave us the Houndour line, which are based on Doberman Pinschers, and Furfrou, which is based on a Poodle. So, in all fairness, I'm actually surprised that we don't have a Siberian Husky Pokemon. And these are kind of an interesting Pokemon nonetheless. especially as an Ice-type Pokemon. Or specifically, a normal Ice-type Pokemon. Yeah. If you hadn't already guessed, there are several unused type combinations that we have not gotten. And honestly, it's kind of makes sense that the number one entry for me would more or less kind of fill one of these unused type combinations. And honestly, the Siberian Huskymon fits perfectly as a normal ice type. And keep in mind, I've created and thought of ideas for Pokemon that filled specific type combination niches. As I created a jack-o'-lantern Pokemon that's like fire-grass, that could essentially be a grass-fire type. I created fairy fighting type elven warriors, elven warrior-esque Pokemon. And in all fairness, I created a normal ghost type Pokemon that was based on Roadkill. And this was before the likes of Skullvillain, Iron Valiant, and the Hisuian Zorua line and were introduced for those three type combinations. However, one of the few Pokemon I created was a Siberian Husky Pokemon for a Brazilian-based Pokemon region based on Brazil. Don't know why it would be for a Brazil-based Pokemon region. But in all fairness, I did create one. However, I also created I added in my own fan-made type of the Beast type. And thus I made it an Ice type, I made both of them an Ice Beast type. Which in hindsight, I more or less ignored. I'm actually mad at myself that I didn't make them normal Ice type from the jump. So, basically, I think if we did make a Siberian Husky Pokemon, we could make a normal Ice type Pokemon. It would be interesting to make a normal Ice type Pokemon. Granted, it would be 4 times weak to fighting, but honestly, it's a price we have to pay. Additionally, the Ice type needs a lot more love because at this point, it's not the best typing thus far, so maybe a Pokemon with more moderate stats, an Ice type Pokemon with more moderate stats could kind of even things out for the Ice type. And I think a Siberian Husky Pokemon would be incredibly perfect. So that's why the Siberian Husky is number 1. Alright. That being said, so that's why the Siberian Husky Pokemon is number 1. Alright. That being said, like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, if you like this video. And of course, if you want to support me, you can do so on my Patreon page at patreon.com/theautisticscyther. And honestly, if there is a free tier, you can essentially... Well, I'm still kind of finding ways to essentially put in a free tier. But in all fairness, if you don't have the money to to pay for a tier, or if there's a free tier, then you could essentially join that. Again, at this point, I'm just doing this for the. I'm just doing this because I'd appreciate all the support I can get, especially since it's been a year since I started my channel, and honestly, it has been an amazing ride. So, yeah, as long as I have your support, it's enough to basically motivate me to make more and more amazing videos for you guys. That's just all I have to say. That being said, I'm the Autistic Scyther, and next week we're gonna take a look at a fan favorite gimmick and seeing my favorite Mega Evolutions. See you then.